After our last video on the dub of ghost stories, some anime fans have come to compare the self-aware humor found in some more liberal dubs to Abridged series themselves, but is that comparison warranted? Today I sit with Scott Frerichs, otherwise known as KaiserNeko, who many might know as the writer, director, editor, and actor on one of the most influential anime abridging communities on the internet, Team 4-Star. Given his experiences, it only felt right to ask for his opinion on this matter, and we look forward to hearing yours down in the comments below as well. So without further ado, let's get this discussion going. Thank you so much for joining us, Scott. It's always a pleasure working with you.
Always a pleasure working with you, man. Absolutely.
Obviously, when it comes to anime abridges, most people probably think of our own online big three, whether it be Little Karibo, Something Witty, or Team 4-Star. But it's clear, based on some comments we've received on past videos and discussions we've seen on Twitter, that what classifies as an abridge has sort of become a bit harder to define. At least that's what people seem to be making it out to be.
It's becoming increasingly nebulous.
Yes, it is. It's people either just like to attach the label to anything that even seems remotely comedic, while others just seem to keep it strictly to the online sphere, which is fair. But in your personal, professional opinion, as one of the front runners,
professional abridger,
what is your take on this phenomena, if we want to call it that?
So it's really interesting to see the term abridged really be thrown around, changed, and kind of mutilated in some places, because it all started with Little Karibo's Yu-Gi-Oh! Abridged, and I think that ultimately it set a very, very firm groundwork on what an abridged series is, and I think things that deviate from that are ultimately betraying the spirit of it. Because with Little Karibo, it was going through the plot episode by episode, but taking a comedic slant on everything. I think that at the core is the core of what an abridged series is. And it cuts stuff down. It also, it abbreviates, makes it more comedic, but goes through the story. Because as we saw, Yu-Gi-Oh! Abridged has gone from episode 1 to episode... what are we at now?
I think we're at episode 50 or 60.
Yeah, it's so many damn episodes of Yu-Gi-Oh! Abridged. It's gone through the story, and I think that is the baseline of what an abridged series is. And I think, and that's why sometimes when I see abridged one-shot, I'm like, well, is that really abridged, or did you just make a parody? Did you just make a parody with the footage?
Well, that's kind of a tricky definition, because what is the difference between an abridge and a parody?
Yeah, well, I think the abridged is attempting to actually go through the story. I think an abridged series is attempting to go through the story proper, while, again, abridging it, abbreviating it, making it comedic. And I guess, you know what? So, I've been amalgamating all these different factors, but I think so, at the core of it, what an abridged series is, something that takes the original footage, cuts it down, makes it more comedic, but attempts to actually go through the story proper.
So anything that deviates too far from what the core initial story beats were is no longer an abridge.
I feel like
that's where you want to draw the line.
Yeah, and I feel like that's why some one-offs are not necessarily abridged. I think they're more just parody shorts.
It's interesting because even now it feels like this is becoming a more prevalent conversation. Anime in general has a very loose definition to it.
Oh yeah.
It means something different depending on where you live or where you grew up. In Japan, anime is any type of animation. SpongeBob is anime in Japan.
SpongeBob is the best anime. Did you see the last opening? It was amazing.
Oh no! Oh right, yeah, the third opening.
Yeah. Oh my god.
Do you think that was Patrick underneath the cloak?
I've got some fan theories here. There's a forum I'm actually subscribed to.
Really, I'll need that link, because you can pull so many story threads just from an opening. Surprised Jeff from Mother's Basement hasn't tried dissecting those yet. So that'd be
my god, I would absolutely... That should have been his April Fool's Day.
there's always next year. Or who knows, maybe this isn't the real last ending. But yeah, anime is, speaking of Jeff, because he even did a video on like what constitutes as anime, and I do definitely think there's a discussion as to what counts and what doesn't, since we do have a lot of, especially with some of the Netflix shows, we have a lot of shows that are American produced or American written but made in Japan.
Yeah.
So it's kind of weird seeing that similar type of nebulous conversation, like you said, occurring in the abridged sphere. And sometimes it does get a bit tricky because we have shows recently. Me and my partner have been rewatching Yu-Gi-Oh! GX, and the pinnacle of 4Kids dub entertainment. And sometimes it feels like the dub is a parody of itself. There will be very blatant moments where you can tell it wasn't in the original, that characters will look at the camera or make reference to another character's accent and how cartoony it is. Is it possible for, and I guess this is where we enter another line, where do we draw the line between an abridge and an official product?
So if we're going to go by what is an abridged series or what isn't an abridged series, Yu-Gi-Oh! GX is not an abridged series, not in any sense of the word. Mm-hmm. And I will be happy to put the knife in that neck, because by and large, it is the same show with nothing removed except for maybe stuff for censorship. Mm-hmm. Telling the same story, just with, more comedic dialogue. And that, at that point, is more of either a bad dub or a gag dub.
Well, it's frustrating because some people seem to be equating the latter, a gag dub, to an abridged series. Anything that seems to have even slightly punchy dialogue or something even remotely comedic. I brought, before we got into call, brought up the Hells dub, which I'm sure must be frustrating in some cases if some people, because we had this discussion before when we were working on the video, that you guys went out of your way to make sure that it was as true to the original as possible, and that you weren't going to do anything remotely close to what you guys do for DBZA Abridge or Hellsing Abridge. And yet there might be still some people that will be like, oh, Team 4-Star did this? Well, of course they're going to abridge it or make it funny. Or they'll hear a funny line like this was kind of funny watching it in retrospect. There was a blatant Dragon Ball Z joke in the official movie, the official subs. But somebody could watch that clip of the, and you guys dubbed that straight. But someone could look at that clip dubbed out of context and say, "Oh, yeah, of course, Team 4-Star. Well, why wouldn't they do something like that?" Is that frustrating?
Maybe just a little bit. The really funny thing was going through. There was a video that somebody posted on YouTube talking about all the funny lines, apparently perceived as rewrites on our behalf of a lot of scenes in Hells, and 2/3 of them already had jokes in that scene that we just had to adapt. And don't get me wrong, there are some scenes where we tried to spice up the dialogue just a little bit, but they were already in scenes that were meant to convey a bit of levity, a bit of comedy. What I wanted to do was make sure that the dialogue in English gave this sense of fresh energy. I didn't want it to be too serious because the movie itself, doesn't get too serious. When it does, we played it 100% straight. We made sure that we didn't mess with any of the scenes where shit was going down. But there, funny enough, there's a scene early on where Rine, the main character, talks about another character that she had just met who was very handsome and friendly. And I looked up a couple of terms, and chocolate box, someone who looks sweet and is sweet. They've got the looks, and they're sweet inside and out was the idea. And I used that. I'm like, oh yeah, total chocolate box. And that made it into the script. I was like, okay, all right, cool. I mean, for that scene, she's obviously swooning over him, so I wanted to go with something that was cute and funny, and it worked. But again, those scenes were meant to be a little bit funny, and I just tried to make sure that all that was communicated. I wanted to make sure that each scene, all the dialogue felt like it fit. So I don't think I don't think it's even close to a gag dub. I just tried to give it a little bit of extra kick.
We agree. It's just frustrating. You brought up compilations, and there are a lot of best clip compilations on YouTube for your guys' shows, for for anything really, Game Grumps. And do you think it's possible that people are starting to look more to the compilations and basically looking at the content without the context and making judgments solely based off of that? Because if they owned the film and they saw that it wasn't a complete, it wasn't always funny, that those were just moments of levity, that it did have these really serious, heart-wrenching moments, or if they understood, or if they watched the original, understood, oh no, like they adapted these jokes. They didn't like, or they punched up the dialogue, or they spiced things up. They didn't create a farce. They didn't change what kind of story was trying to be told, or at the very least, they didn't change the genre of the story itself. Do you think that would have made things better, or do you think we've sort of reached this point where people are starting to equate anything, not even just gag dubs, anything remotely funny with abridged comedy?
A little bit. So I've heard some people call Ghost Stories an official abridged series, and again, just want to, that frustrates me, not because I don't want people associating things that are not abridged with abridged, because that offends me personally, but because at that point, the term is starting to lose all meaning. Ghost Stories is not an abridged series. It's just a dub that, as it went on, got progressively off the rails because they were given the okay to. And I do think part of that, I definitely believe that we are becoming a culture that is just basically tuning into bite-sized chunks of stuff. Which, you know what, maybe that's why abridged series started that trend. We'll take what you like and we'll reduce it to bite-sized chunks that you can laugh at.
True, abridged does mean to shorten after all, so...
Yeah, and it's really fascinating to watch. It can be frustrating sometimes, if only because, as a guy who was an English minor when he was going to college, I was like, that is not what that is. Proper word usage.
It's kind of how things have sort of become full circle. Abridging might have started that trend. Because yes, even though you guys and Little Karibo do sort of follow similar story beats, you are cutting out content, reducing things. I mean, it's only in the most recent season that your episodes started reaching quote unquote full episode length. Because usually they would be somewhere between 10 and 15 minutes, right?
Yeah, when we started out, they were somewhere around like 7 to maybe 9. Like when they hit 10, it was a momentous occasion. Somewhere in the middle of season 2, though, 10 minutes sort of became the minimum. Like oh yeah, we're approaching about 10 minutes, so that's about maybe time to end the episode. And then into season 3, it's like 12, 13, 14. And that part of that just came down to the fact that we had become so focused on making sure that we had covered significant story beats, and like we had become so focused on the story itself and telling it that we didn't want to end too soon. So that was interesting, and that's kind of that's also the interesting part about how our abridged series have changed over time. We have stuff like Yu-Gi-Oh! Abridged, which very rarely has moments of seriousness, of drama. Not that he hasn't done it on occasion, but it's a lot less common in his material than it is in our material, where somewhere in the second season we realized that if we wanted to, we could actually deliver on these bigger, more momentous moments effectively. At least our audience believes so. Maybe, in the grand scheme of things, maybe we're all hacks. I'm willing to accept that, but
I think the numbers don't lie. I mean, either way, it's impressive if you've been faking it for this long.
Right. But when we realized, hey, we could actually deliver some serious, heart-wrenching moments if we tried. We started trying to make sure that on occasion, not every episode, but on occasion, when the big stuff hit, it hit hard. And there was this sort of idea as we moved on to find that balance. And I think that was part of the fact that as we went on, we started writing more for the characters and less just irreverently for the scenes that we were playing with. It was less, okay, what joke can we make about this scene? And it was more about, okay, what joke can we make that fits the character's development? Which is really interesting. It was fascinating as that changed. Because again, the tone of season 3 is different from season 2's, and season 2's is different from season 1. So
yeah, you guys have definitely taken more and more, and I don't mean this in a negative way. Would you say a more professional step with each passing episode each season?
There was definitely a push for us to do more professional work. You know, we increased the we got better equipment. We started making more well-formatted scripts. You know, I started directing everybody personally instead of just kind of giving them the script and giving them directions like I did in season 1. As we went on, there was more and more, we were planning more. There was a joke with Goku planning out everything that happened with Perfect Cell. And I was like, all right, before we get into all this Goku stuff, I had planned that ever since before Goku showed up to save Piccolo and Shinhan against Second Form Cell. I was like, no, this is my plan for this character, so let's build around this. So
interesting.
Yeah.
You planned that payoff basically halfway through the season.
Yeah, that was something that I was building up to for a good long while, because I realized, and here's the crazy thing: when you have the miracle of retrospect, you can see when something's not going to work unless you start building for it early on. And I was like, I need to make sure that Goku's relationship with Gohan and the way he behaves and the way he acts, I needed a payoff for that. I needed a payoff for Gohan. So that was my big goal. I was going to build that up. I was going to make that the forefront. And see, that comes down to it. Like, the Abridged series, none of us used to do shit like that back in the day. Nobody gave a crap about preparing that long in advance, except for maybe a joke or two where, I know the joke that I want to end the season on. And people did that. But, that kind of stuff, you didn't used to do that. But over time, people started taking a Abridged series as this way of challenging themselves as writers. It gave them this opportunity. It's exactly like the Marvel universe.
Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Because and specifically when I say that, I mean it's you are taking a character that already exists with stories that have already existed, and now it's your opportunity to tell it. How are you gonna do it? And that's such a great writing exercise, because it basically sits you down and says, all right, how are you gonna make this work? And that's, it's not like Dragon Ball Z Abridged has been nothing but a writing exercise for me, but I'll tell you one thing, it forced me to be a better writer over time.
Framing it like that, would you almost say, we talk about this ad nauseum in almost all of our videos about how anime dubs are not a translation, they're an adaptation. But would you say abridging has sort of evolved into this new form of adaptation, telling a similar story in a slightly different way?
Yeah, actually, I could see that. Because so I watched Sword Art Online Abridged. Mm-hmm. I've watched 2 episodes of Sword Art Online.
Mm-hmm.
I honestly really love what the guys at Something Witty do. Their reinterpretation of the story, their take on the characters, it has been incredibly entertaining and something that I have enjoyed. And on one hand, that seems like such a problematic statement, because God knows I hate when people say, oh man, you're so much better than the original Dragon Ball. I'm like, please don't say that, please, I beg of you. But at the same time, man, I wouldn't watch Sword Art Online, but I'll watch Sword Art Online Abridged till it's done.
Are you ever worried that somebody is looking, well, you just mentioned it, but someone will look at DBZ Abridged and see it as kind of a replacement for the original?
Yeah, I mean, people said that, and I don't agree with it, obviously. I mean, I bought all of Kai, and I was hoping for a really, really, really decent, remastered Blu-ray. Maybe I'll wait another 10 years for that. And, I have bought the series several times over. Obviously, I'm a huge fan, and when I say support the official release, that is 100% me saying, hey, if you don't own the show, please do. There's a couple of different ways to do it. Pay it forward to the people that brought you this in the first place, because it's a wonderful series that I grew up with. I've got a lot of nostalgia for it. There's no way, no how that we could replace it. That's crazy to me.
Crazy to you that
anyone would suggest it, honestly.
But it's definitely evolved as a form of entertainment. Definitely coincide with the growth of the internet itself. And it's only been 10 years since you guys started too. Did you ever think you would evolve to the point where you guys are now, creatively, professionally?
Are you kidding me? No, absolutely not. No, when I started this with the guys years back, all I could think to myself was, man, this is going to be a cool couple of years. I hope we get to do the Frieza saga. And
you had no long-term plans when you guys started?
No, man. No, the Cell Saga was like a 70-30 chance. And the Frieza saga was a 50-50 when we started. Like when we started, how do I put this? When we started out, we're like, all right, we'll see if we can do the Saiyan saga. If we can do that, then maybe we'll do the Frieza saga. And by the end of the Saiyan saga, we're like, oh, okay, yeah, no, we're definitely doing Frieza now. Like, no way we aren't. But if you'd asked us, hey, you're gonna do Frieza at the very beginning, we like, maybe, we'll see. And then by the time we were getting close to the end of Frieza, there had to be a conversation about whether or not we were gonna do Cell, because Cell, it was a huge undertaking, and there was a lot of back and forth on whether or not we had the time, the budget, because despite all the other things that had made us money up until that point, we had never monetized the actual show. So that became one of those things of the episodes do gangbusters on YouTube, and we didn't see any profit from that. So it's like, okay, we also have to work on all this other stuff in the meantime to make sure it makes money.
Oh yeah, that's true, because you guys don't want to profit from something that isn't yours.
Yeah, and that's always been tough. We removed non-profit from the disclaimer a long time ago because we're making profit in other ways, but YouTube, wasn't the way we were doing it.
Back then, I remember you, I can't remember if it was you or somebody else at Team 4 Star tweeted this, more or less about how things have evolved over time, about how DBZA was less about, at first it was just about making as many jokes as possible and just having fun, and then, like you said, over time turned into this more deeply rooted, more planned and well thought out thing. Like, I can't imagine you guys knew how you were going to end jokes like the Krillin counter at the beginning.
That one has been
when
planned.
You first conceived it.
Oh man, that one's been planned for ages.
Really?
Yep.
You always knew it was going to end the way that it did at the end of the
Nick did.
At the end of the Cell saga?
Yeah,
Nick did. Okay.
Nick wanted that joke really badly. And it went through a couple of different versions, but it was always basically the same idea of he hooked up with 18, and it would end with a negative count on the cock, the cock, as I like to call it. Which, interestingly enough, it destroying the Krillin counter wasn't necessarily something we had come up with, but by the end of it, I'm like, oh my god, wait, guys, this could be amazing. This could be spectacular. And yeah, no, having Scattershot do it was... A lot of people said Kien's on it. I'm like, nah. Visually, that's just not as... It just didn't work.
It's a different technique.
Yeah. And but to actually follow up on what you said, yeah, nobody expected us to have a studio. Nobody expected for us to dub an actual movie. And yet we did. Nobody expected us to be making original series. And yet we are. And no, none of us expected that because, again, when we started this, it was just going to be a couple of friends getting together to make a fun series. And then we even joked, I remember we joked, man, I wonder if we'll ever get taken out to conventions. A year later, we're at Youmacon. 3 years later, we're in Melbourne, Australia. So it was pretty crazy.
It's kind of tricky because a lot of the times it sometimes feels like people don't fully appreciate all the work that goes into these projects. So sometimes having all of these false equivalencies, like what's better than this, or oh, this is funny, this is definitely Abridged. It seems, I assume, sometimes trying to be fair and respectable to how far you guys have come. Do you think, especially with all these projects you have planned in the pipeline, which we will not talk about, do you think there'll be a point where you guys are known for more than just the Abridges?
That's one of the things I'm hoping for. With some of the new projects that we have coming out, I would love for certain members of the team to be making their own, how do I put this? There are multiple people working on different projects. Right now, Kurt's working on AWF, something that we've talked about a little bit. We're also working on a series called Unabridged. We also have Fistmaster, which is Stefan Krosek's animated series. And we have something new coming out that is going to be both new and nostalgic for people, and I'm really excited about it. And we just have a lot of things coming out, but one of the things that I'm looking forward to, in all honesty, is never having Abridged on the name of any project I ever do again. Ever again. And that doesn't come down to me hating Abridged series, but I've spent the last 11 years on the same show. So what I'd like to do is be able to put that down for good and start working on new personal original projects, because after you've been working on something for so long, you just have to start on something new. And some people don't agree with that. Some people will hear that and be angry as if we're betraying them, but at the same time, if you want a good product, you want the person working on it to feel invigorated by it. And let me tell you, after a certain amount of time, you have to do something new. You have to try and branch out. And that's why, when we said we're doing the Boo Saga, we said we're doing it very differently. And that we have to, because we can't do, if I had to be honest with you, for me, the Cell Saga was lightning in a bottle. I felt that is the strongest writing we've ever done to me. Other people have disagreed. Some people think season 2 was better, and I do not disagree with them personally. That's their opinion, and I'm not going to say that they're wrong by any means. If they said season 1 was the best, I'd be very confused. But season 3 was kind of a peak for us, and there's no way we can continue on like we had.
You mentioned in your stream when season 3 was concluding that you were going to have a different approach, that you were going to be a bit more experimental, a bit more, basically hold back less, I assume, which is funny because that arguably coincides with how Akira Toriyama approached the Boo Saga.
Right?
When he was writing it, because at the peak of the Cell Saga, his new editor said, I'm not going to stop you, do what you want, basically. Was that kind of intentional, or does it just kind of turn out that way?
I think life imitates art, imitating life, imitating art. I think, how do I put this? There's definitely a bit of coincidence there, to be sure. Because when I look at the way things went, for me, a lot of people said, oh, they wish they'd end, Toriyama wanted to end here or end there. And, for me, there is a little bit that the Dragon Ball Z Abridged ended at the end of the Cell Saga for me. So everything after this is me trying to take it from a different angle and do something new and fresh. And I think that's much like with Dragon Ball Z Kai, where it ended at the end of the Cell Saga. It's pretty funny. I'll agree. It's funny that there is that coincidence there, but it is 100% a coincidence. It is funny.
Well, you mentioned also when with that glorious April Fool's joke that I'll never forgive you for, with Kai 2.9, that you would you say that was your first step with that experimentation? Because you guys tried a lot of things there that you haven't really done before in the series.
No. It's the Garlic Jr. episode was actually closer to the stuff that we've done for Digimon, Abridgemon. Because Abridgemon is us, our id unleashed. Like, we don't care necessarily about consistency, about telling a plot. We just wanted to make a bunch of silly jokes. Where the Garlic Jr. saga was closer to it with more. How do I say? With less in-jokes. I would say that the Garlic Jr. episode was less in-jokes, but more unleashed id. And that's what that was. And that was because it was an April Fool's Day episode, like we have with other stuff. When it comes to April Fool's Day, we don't really necessarily treat it with the same amount of reverence, which might also be saying we don't try as hard. But it's really for a way for us to kick back, relax, and have fun. That's what they are. And if people don't exactly like them, that's fine, because they're for us. They're 100% for us. They're just, and that's not saying, oh, that doesn't mean you can't criticize them or not like them. In fact, if you don't like it, that's cool. That's fine. You know, and everyone's gonna get their normal stuff sooner or later. But every once in a while, we need to be able to sit back and be like, here's a bunch of bullshit, have fun. Or not, we don't care.
Sometimes you do need to do that, and hey, that even goes back to what you said before. If you want people working on things that they enjoy working on, because when somebody is drained, when somebody is tired of doing the thing that they used to love, most of the time the audience can feel that. And very rarely you'll get good products coming out of that. Like you said, art imitates life. It imitates the good and it can imitate the bad. So it's good that you guys are basically, at the end of the day, you could say nothing's really changed because you guys are just doing what you feel like you want to do and the things that you love, and you have a growing audience that responds to that. And it's interesting because you could argue the same thing about regular anime dubs in general. Most, if not all, the people that are working on them work on them because they love working on them. They're definitely not doing it for the money.
No.
Definitely not doing it for the money. So when somebody takes the material and they adapt it as best they can to create a product that is both respectable to the original creator, but also something that they themselves feel like they can appreciate along with their audience, that's usually what leads to the best dubs, or at least the most revered dubs. You look at shows like Panty and Stocking or Cowboy Bebop, which, yes, they needed intense or Fooly Cooly, which all needed intense adaptation, intense not cutting, but altering or replacing. And the fact that some people will equate those things to, oh, they're abridging it. It feels almost like a lose-lose situation sometimes, because some fans will either do that, or they'll be on the other side and say, oh, don't make any changes, don't do anything at all. So it's possible. So I guess the question I'm asking is it possible for an anime to, we mentioned ghost stories before. You don't consider that an abridge, even though it kind of like an abridge, it goes through the same exact story beats, but completely changes the tone of the series to something that is, I feel like if a Japanese fan or fan of the original watch it, it wouldn't necessarily be unrecognizable, but they definitely raise an eyebrow, like, what is this? Do you think it's possible for a show to be an abridge without actually cutting out the content or quote unquote shortening it?
I think that is in the damn name. I think if you don't cut, I think if you don't shorten, I think if you don't abridge, it's not an abridged series. And that's where I've got to really draw that line. That's why I said if we want to talk about what's not abridged, that, bam, right there. That is not abridged. And that's, I think if you're going to use the word abridged, it has to mean something. And if you are not shortening it, if you are not making it shorter, then you've completely missed the point.
Even with shows like, because you did a full background on this, shows like Samurai Pizza Cat, or some people brought up Shin-Chan, which had intensive. So you wouldn't equate adaptation or rewrites anywhere close to what you guys do for abridging, ostensibly.
Well, okay, it's close. Because there are plenty of times, and so the real trouble is when it comes to setting scenes up to tell different jokes. One of the things that we have the pleasure to do, we have the luxury of cutting shit up and making scenes work in ways that they were never ever supposed to. So, you know, that is a luxury that we have where these shows don't. At least. Sometimes they'll mess with it a little bit. God knows that Samurai Pizza Cats never intended to have mostly because they didn't exist at the time, DVD release where you'd be switching the channels, the audio channels, so they cut up as much as they wanted to. But, you know.
They also had very little work with outside of the actual footage because they didn't really have any translated scripts.
Yeah, sometimes they had no scripts, bad scripts. Yeah, they had so many problems that basically they were by the seat of their pants. But yeah, no, when it comes down to it, those aren't abridged series. They're just they're either gag dubs like Ghost Stories, or to a certain extent Shin-Chan, or actually, the interesting thing is with Samurai Pizza Cats, it's not like if Samurai Pizza Cats like oh god, Nyato Ninden, shoot. The original version was already at an 8, and the English version's more like at a 10 or 11. I actually did an entire special on how the English version of Samurai Pizza Cats is only slightly jokier than the original Japanese version.
Yeah, that's why I wanted your opinion on it. Don't worry, I'm gonna link to the full breakdown that you did in the description down below. But that is Samurai Pizza Cat, Shin-Chan, Ghost Stories. A lot of people kind of put all those in the same ballpark, even though I feel like each of them are their own unique situation. So it felt very weird, and getting back to where this whole conversation came from, that people wanted to blanket them underneath the same umbrella of Abridge, even though they're not.
And I feel like that is taking away from some of the work that a lot of these guys have done on these shows, because here's the thing. Panty and Stocking. Let's talk about Panty and Stocking for a minute. That was a series that was turned up to 11 in the English dub. It was at like a 9 in the Japanese version, but basically the Japanese told them, I want to learn new curse words from your dub. And
go as far as you are legally allowed to do.
Exactly. And they did. The stuff that is in the Panty and Stocking dub is just, frankly, obscene. And I love it. It's what you sign up for. You sit down and like, all right, Monica Rial, offend the living crap out of me as this lowly sadist. Oh no, masochist. Come on, Jamie Marshy. Talk about how you want to suck 1,000,000 dicks. You sign up for it. Like, you're ready for that when you sit down with that dub, because that's kind of the idea of that dub, presented not only by Funimation but by the original Japanese. They're like, yep, this is gonna be crazy. Enjoy. And then let's talk about Milk-chan. Remember Milk-chan?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Let's talk about the fact that there are 2 dubs out there. One that is a 100% faithful dub of the original Japanese version, and one that is changed to fit for an American audience. That is insane. That's crazy, and I kind of love it. And, you know, is the less accurate one an abridged series? No. Is it a gag dub? I would still argue no. It is an adaptation of the work trying to appeal to an American audience, again, with the okay from the Japanese. Because, let me tell you, if you watch the 1-for-1 dub of Milk-chan, unless, like, it is going to make less sense to you than if you were someone speaking who knew Japanese, watching Japanese. Like, it doesn't make any sense because most of it doesn't work in English. So it's interesting because sometimes dubs will take a completely different take on a joke, on a scene, and it is 100% accurate for the tone and meaning, where originally, if they had gone one for one, it wouldn't have worked. But I will say this, for stuff like ghost stories, that is, and this has been argued. I believe it was Greg Ayers argued this point. I think it was Greg. It might have been Chris. It was somebody on the translation staff said that it's not a gag dub, it's just a dub. And I disagree. I love them, but I gotta disagree on that one because they intentionally went out of their way to make it a joke. And I think at that point it's like, no, see, that's not the same. That's not an actual, like, if you're gonna call that a dub, then that's a bad dub because you didn't even try. You intentionally went away from the tone and meaning of these scenes. So I would rather call it a gag dub and say it was very good, rather than call it a dub and say, oh, well, that's not a very good dub then.
That's actually a very interesting approach. So it's not an abridge, but don't want to consider it in a quote-unquote official dub because it does kind of, and this is always the weird thing where when people say they either ironically or unironically love the Ghost Stories dub because it kind of goes against exactly what a dub is supposed to be. It takes that rule of don't be a one-to-one translation of the original material and goes so far to the other side of the fence that it becomes its own thing, ostensibly.
Well, it's that moment of when are you trying to adapt what's there, or are you trying to replace it with something funny? Once you go from adaptation to replacement, it is no longer a dub, like an accurate dub. At that point, it is a gag dub. Well, if you're trying to be funny about it, I can't imagine trying to tell a different story that is also serious by changing the intent and lines of a scene. Then again, I think, funny enough, Yu Yu Hakusho did that a little bit. I remember back in the day where it's like, that was not the intent of that line at all. They've gone off script. And as a guy who still loves the Yu Yu Hakusho dub for what it was, I've got a lot of nostalgia for it. There's some questionable choices made back in that old back in the 2000s.
Well, Yu Yu Hakusho, and we have something planned for that down the pipeline, but it definitely is indicative of that whole transition period of when we're getting away from the early era of Dragon Ball Z, like the original dub, and starting to take more of a step towards what dubs have sort of become nowadays. Because it's not a total deviation like the original was, but you're right, it does make quite a few changes. And there's even a conversation as to whether or not it's aged as well. It's aged that well, but we'll save that for a different conversation. So that's actually a very interesting perspective on things. Do you think we'll ever get to a point where official dubs will be handled the same way that an Abridged series is handled?
I hope not.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, truth be told, I don't necessarily want, unless it's by the parent company, I don't necessarily want that. I definitely wouldn't mind a parent company going out there and being like, hey, we made, because that reminds me, actually, Sword Art Online Gun Gale. Mm-hmm. It was Gun Gale?
Gun Gale Online?
Yeah, Gun Gale Online. I remember that there was a recap episode that they had to do, mm-hmm. and they basically gag dubbed a couple of scenes, and even did some visual stuff to make them funnier, and that was great. I was like, oh hey, you just made a bunch of jokes about online gaming in these scenes, and they were really funny. And I was like, in the fact that you get the freedom to do that, which the Japanese very rarely do. It's so tough for them to have fun with their own materials sometimes. To see it actually happen was actually a lot of fun, and I enjoyed that. And I remember back in the day, I remember 4Kids. There's that classic commercial of Batman and Jigglypuff.
Yeah, from the Kids WB.
Yeah, they used to have so much fun with that stuff back in the day. And you know what? That was great. That stuff was a lot of fun, and I loved that. But I don't know if I'd ever want to see that done in an official capacity without at least, the parent company involved, because I feel like we've struggled for so long to have serious, legitimate dubs for everything that comes out in the United States. There's this part of me that's seen some stuff in Dragon Ball Super. That's like, I'm not sure how much I appreciate that change. I don't think I like those donuts personally. And there's that part of me that's like, oh boy, I grew up in the 90s and 2000s. I remember how long it took us to get here. Can we not take a step back? And there have been some people who are like, man, that joke sounded like it was straight out of the Abridged series. I'm like, oh, okay, well, that's interesting. So this is how that feels.
Is that when you were first sort of exposed to those kinds of comments, or?
Kind of. The funny thing is, I would see stuff like that on the old 4Kids stuff, like, man, these guys were making Abridged jokes back before, it was actually abridged. And I'm like, well, that's, Like,
well, I think intent plays a very big part in all of that as well, because why 4Kids made changes and why you guys might make changes are two completely different things.
Yeah, I'm like, I don't want people to accept complete rewrites for scenes that, like, here's the thing. So there's a really funny little joke that Goku has in Super where he's talking about how the Wi-Fi on the Lookout is better than at his house. And it's very under the breath. It's kind of like in the background, so it's not really a part of the scene. And that was funny. And I'm like, okay, that is non-intrusive. It's during a scene where there's a bunch of levity in the first place. And I was like, okay, that was obviously not there in the original for anybody who, like, watches the original Japanese version, but it's not so far off character or off tone that it ruins the scene. And I was like, okay, that's fine. But then you have these other scenes where sometimes they put a joke in there that obviously wasn't in the original and it makes no sense, and it's like, okay, that's a little different. And it used to be that was all the time, no matter what. Big Daddy Garlic, whatever turns you on, Big Boy, bunch of stuff in the old Z dub that was just, wow, how did this get in here? Just a bunch of weird, odd, like, Mondo cool. Like, I remember back in those days. So it's fascinating to see that stuff not necessarily come back, but I'm a little, I'm gun shy as a guy who grew up with that stuff. I'm like, no, please. I can't have it back.
We grew up during a time where it's like we've seen how it's been and we sort of grew up with how things have changed. So it makes no sense to go back. But another way of looking at it could be maybe people are nostalgic for those times too. Maybe people wouldn't. This has been a surprising prevailing thing we've discovered in the past couple of weeks of this recording, but there is a surprising amount of people that want shows to be turned into gags, that want jokes to be added. And it always seems to be under the pretext of, well, if there was nothing there before, or if it wasn't that good before, or if you can quote unquote improve it, why don't you?
Yeah, actually, there are a lot of people who say, man, the show wasn't really all that good. They should just have fun with it. And on one hand, I'm like, we got some fun stuff back in the 2000s from that. I remember, like Ghost Stories is a fun anachronism. It's like, holy shit, can you believe this thing exists? But yeah, it's also that weird thing of like, on the other hand, there are probably actually fans of this material, and I don't know how badly I want to shit on them by giving them an inaccurate dub.
Yeah, once you start getting into conversations of if it's good or if it's bad, that's a far more subjective conversation than I think people assume sometimes.
Well, it's interesting because people I know on the in the dubbing circuit have already said people have watched this in Japanese already, so I'm gonna give them something new. I'm gonna give them something that's going to surprise them, and I'm like, well, that's on one hand, if you do it again in that scene where where it's in the background where there's no conflict, I was like, you know what, that's funny. Or, oh gosh, there's this scene where Goku is like, it's a scene transition, and it's just him jumping up in place up and down in the King Town, and he's
singing Shala,
and I'm like, yes, okay, that is great, that is perfect. I have no problems with that. But then you have Gamergate Creepshow, and there's a lot more questions to be asked about that one.
You're right. That does kind of set a precedent. It's always tricky because some people might think that joke is funny and completely innocuous, while others are like, why is this here? It has no reason to be here. And that's always the tightrope that some people walk, and everyone's going to have different standards, different sensibilities, or a different line in the sand, so to speak, with regards to how far they want that to go.
Absolutely. I've got my own set of guidelines on how I feel about all of this stuff. I stick very true to them. I try to have, it's a professional standard because I've worked on material like this, so I try to have one. I also try to, give a little room for flexibility when, the project is different, but you gotta, for me, there is a line in the sand in a lot of different places that I can point to and be like, this is where it crossed the line for me, and I can tell you why. But for a lot of people, like you said, it is so easy for them to be like, oh, but I liked that joke. I thought that was funny. And I'm like, well, you know what? That's fair. I disagree on it being there, and I might even disagree on it being funny. But if it works, you can't deny that it works. So that's always that conversation of give, take, and what is best for the product. And, oh man, art interpretation. Yeah. That's fun.
Yeah, and you hit the nail on the head. Conversation. That's part of the reason why we started this channel in the first place. It was to create a hub for people to have those conversations, or at the very least, have as much information as they can so they can start having those conversations on their own. But even like right now, we're having this conversation about what makes an Abridged series. For some people, it's so vague that they'll just attach the term to anything. Whereas for you, it's like, no, if it doesn't do this, then I don't consider it an abridged. There are other terms that we can supplement what this specific example is for. And yeah, that's definitely appreciative because you're looking at it from the perspective of someone who has worked on official anime dubs and someone who has spearheaded the evolution of anime abridges during the last 10, 12 years. And we all really do appreciate that. And again, who better to have this conversation? Do you have any other thoughts for the future of anime abridging or any other potential crossover between what we consider an abridge and what we consider an official anime dub?
Well, you know what's funny? There's a clip out there. There's a clip just floating around out there on the internet, and don't know where it came from. Don't know how it came to exist, but it comes from the Boo Saga of Kai. For some reason, it's got a lot of familiar voices in it, and it was that scene, the retelling of the Cell games. Might have seen it, might not. Had a lot of voices in it. Had some jokes in it. That seemed pretty crazy. And I cannot comment too much upon how that came to be, or where it went. But I will say, as the industry grows and becomes more internet savvy, there's a lot of interconnectivity. We've worked with Sungwon Cho, and Sungwon Cho has worked on a bunch of professional projects. We, as an abridging group, basically lent our voices and writing talent to an entire movie, a Madhouse film. People who started out as amateurs became professionals. And professionals recognized those amateurs and the talents that they gave and the effects that they had on the industry. It's impossible to deny the effect that Yu-Gi-Oh! Abridged had on Yu-Gi-Oh! Nor Dragon Ball Z Abridged had on Dragon Ball. Not that, we're super influencers, but we've definitely been a big advertisement for the series, and we helped give a little bit of extra oomph to an audience that, let's be honest, in the mid-2000s to late 2000s was starting to wane a little bit. And that's fascinating for everybody involved, because we never thought we'd influence anything involving Dragon Ball. And yet, here we are. I've been in Xenoverse. I was in Xenoverse 2. So we're in Lani Bator and Takahata. So, yeah, you're definitely going to see more people reflecting upon that work and perhaps even trying to capture some of that spirit on occasion. Whether or not it's going to be good or bad for the industry, that's for time to tell. But all I want is for people who are passionate about adaptation and about dubbing and about making the best possible material to strive towards that. That's my goal, and I hope that's exactly how we continue moving forward, is that it's passionate people working passionately to make a good product.
And I think very few people, at the very least, would disagree with you on that. At least I hope so.
Yeah, right?
Thank you so much for your time, Scott. This has really been an interesting conversation, and
Thanks.
I hope everybody else can appreciate it as well.
No, I love just talking to you guys, discussing stuff with you guys, because very often you guys ask questions about stuff that's on my mind. So I'm like, ooh, cool, I can talk about this now. It's nice.
Really? Well, if you ever have any other questions or comments, we are that hub that people can come to.
Thank you.
At least we hope so.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you guys so much for listening, and until next time.